Today is Tuesday, June the 9th, and we expected a pullback because of the extremely high reading in the McClellan oscillator, and that's what we got off of the open. And the market tried to recover a little bit, but just basically ended up where it opened, down to 300 points on the Dow, 29 on the NASDAQ, but the NASDAQ made an all-time high. And look at the tech stocks. They're all green. Intel was red. Apple was up 3% because it was a trade-off. Apple announced that their own ARM processors are going to feed their Mac line, and that's a big blow to Intel. But nonetheless, Intel was only off 1%. Apple was up a whopping 3%. And the S&P 500, we're going to see the volume was less than yesterday, but it did sort of move up from 10 a.m. on, but ended up really not doing anything from open to close. So the McClellan oscillator really, as usual, tells the story. And the oscillator now has come down. We might get a better view of it if we look at the McClellan page. And let's do that. We see that it's come down. And you've got this little trend line here of higher lows, which calls for a bit of a bounce tomorrow. But because we're still in the overbought area, it doesn't mean we can't come down and test this prior low. Remember, there are algorithms out there that look at the advancers and decliners, figure out what the McClellan oscillator reading is at any given moment in the day, and trade accordingly. So there's really a rhyme to the reason. Let's go back now and look at other things like the volume stacked, which was less than yesterday, but still on a 3-week, 4-week, 5-week, 6-week, 7-week, 8-week basis, still pretty decent, although we saw a trade-off, a reverse trade between the advancers and decliners in terms of number of shares traded, very few advancers shares traded. But this was just a healthy little pullback, and I don't want to read anything more into it than that. The summation index continued to move up, and now it's over 4,000. So if you remember that this is an indicator 3 to 6 months out, it means that the market is betting that 3 to 6 months out the economy is going to be better. Now with Joe Biden up 14 points in some polls, the market is obviously discounting anything to do with the Democrats raising corporate taxes or doing anything to upset the economy. The Democrats want to see the economy recover. So I think the market is not too worried about a Joe Biden presidency. If they were, we would see the McClellan summation index starting to move down. Now we saw the summation index over 4,000 just at the beginning, well, midway through, when the market was starting to move to its all-time highs. And if we look back here, where it was over 4,000, that also coincided with an uptrend in the market. And similarly back here, this area up here. So this is all just positive for the market. So if we look at our charts, the Dow Jones is stuck with the 78.6%. Now what we said yesterday was that once we're over 78.6%, the typical would be some time for it to come back and test 78.6% for support and then move and complete its 100%. And the reason I think that's positive is because the NASDAQ has already done it. So there's your test perfectly to the penny of 78.6%. The NASDAQ, let's take a look at that next. It did have an all-time high, and it still closed at an all-time high. So the NASDAQ, tech-heavy NASDAQ, is really, really pumping. The volatility index moved up, but nothing to be concerned with. And the S&P 500 pulled back a little bit, but remember, we're probably still looking at a test of 32.56 at the top of this gap. So I would say that the rest of the week is looking pretty positive. Apple, beast, announcing that it was going to use its own microprocessors. So they are starting to really vertically integrate everything that goes into the iPhones, the iPads, and the Macs, and being less and less dependent on other suppliers. They've basically moved Intel out of the way now. They've moved out wireless chips. They've moved out Bluetooth chips. It's just a matter of time before they move out displays. They've tried to command their own display space, but they haven't been able to. But they've partnered with Sharp, I believe, last year. And although they're giving some business to Samsung and LG, you know that they're not big fans of Samsung, so they're looking to vertically integrate that as well. I think even Kramer said, "See, I told you so." But this is a great stock to have. It just means that my in-the-money calls now are just starting to diminish on a theta basis, and still positive delta. I'd be very happy with where I end up at the end of August with the current short calls that I have. They're 300 and 310. And you'd think that that would be really bad with a stock that's at 345. Sure, if I had just had Apple naked all this time, now I'd be looking back and saying what a genius I am. But that's not the way I trade. I trade very conservatively. And when I buy stock, I sell calls. But in the case of Apple, when the stock was at 280, I was selling 310 calls for $20 out in the future. So I'm pretty happy. I'm going to end up not only with 310, but I'm going to end up with the premium from my short calls, which actually was $11.60. So I'll end up with $321.60 on half of my holdings and $309.20 on the other half. That's not the same as 345. I get it, but that's not the way I am. I'm very conservative, and I like to move profitably, but I like to move with as minimum risk as possible. Caterpillar pulled back a little bit. Nice to see. Home Depot continues to just continue the trend higher. Great stock. As it's going now, I would like to see a pullback to 250 so I could roll my 250 weekly short calls. But hell, if I get all of my shares taken from me on Friday, I'm looking at some July or August short puts, and I'm going to use that because I don't want to buy into the market at this point, but I don't mind owning shares at a lower value. So I'm going to sell puts so that if Home Depot pulls back to the 240 area, I'd like to buy it at the 240 area. So I might sell the 240 August puts. Disney stopped at the 200, and that's why I flagged it today to see that although it had a resistance at the 200 SMA Thursday of last week, today's stop and support was at the Chiku span and the 200. Cisco continues to creep a little bit higher. Facebook not making new, well, that is a new closing high for Facebook. Whirlpool, nice to see that pull back. So now below the 78.6, but getting support on the 200. So that's pretty good. And also roughly support on the 200 SMA for the Chiku span. So again, another telling point. CrowdStrike, sort of channeling. People are talking about CrowdStrike possibly moving higher and being one to look for. Let's just take this little zone area here and let's move it here, and let's keep an eye on CrowdStrike for a possible breakout. FSLY, flat. GDX, I don't think there's any interest in gold when the market is this high. Netflix, still struggling with this C point of the shark pattern. That might be something that technical traders are just looking at and thinking that it's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just a bad omen. and they don't want to buy it at this point because they think that this actually might be a shark pattern in the case of bad times. So people are holding off there. AT&T, a little bit of a pullback. Direct support on the cloud, not only for price, but for the Chiku span. And we haven't looked at Wayfair in a while, but it's forming a cup. That's not quite a handle. It's more like a bull flag. And so you want to keep an eye on that. That might be a good stock. So that's all for today. Where are we looking at now? We've still got, on the S&P, we've still got the gap up ahead that's going to be resistance, the gap down below that's going to be support, but it's going to be our McClellan oscillator, which is our tell. And for that, I still prefer to look at the web browser. And tomorrow we'll probably come down and we'll test the overbought area, but there's a very good probability that we're going back up again on the McClellan oscillator. And in a bullish market, we could see this McClellan oscillator for some time staying in the oversold area, like we saw it back here and also here. So it can spend some time above this area, and that's what I'm thinking it might do.